yesterday on the 17th of July 2017, on the second day of the PGL major. Gambit went up against G2 Esports, and the problem that I particularly had with this match was that every person, every analyst, every betting site, everywhere, Gambit were seen as the massive underdogs, which simply wasn't the case, and Gambit was able to showcase exactly why that was. Of course, I wouldn't say that they were favored to win out against G2. However, given the fact that everyone seemed to be completely taking them out of the equation, I do believe as if their 16-6 victory over G2 doesn't just come down to sheer luck. And in particular, you have to look at G2 as a roster and then Gambit as a roster in both their styles of play. G2, of course, being one that is incredibly reliant on individual skill and individual gut feeling in particular. And on top of everything, most importantly, perhaps, individual timing. G2, of course, being an infamously good CT side, but generally not so good on the terrorist side, which makes the win of Gambit even more surprising at a 16-6 scoreline, considering the fact that G2 was able to start on their favored side on Cash, a map where they have played quite a bit in the past and they are quite experienced with even having one of the wall banks in that map fixed in the past because of their player body. Now, particularly G2 is always relying on timing, and timing is something that Gambit was able to manipulate incredibly well against them, using aggression through smokes, using a particularly interesting style of play, including some wall banks that we don't really see used very often in competitive play. Now, what started going wrong was that, first of all, we need to keep in mind that G2 has two players that are almost always fairly consistent, Buddy and NBK. Buddy did not show up at all in this map, and while it could be attributed to him just having a bad day, you have to keep in mind that pretty much everyone on G2 was having a bad day. Pretty much everyone on G2 was having bad numbers, was having negative statistics, so you can't really put that down to sheer luck or down to sheer unluckiness on the side of the French. Now, what started off was G2 actually taking the lead 4-3, but after that it just spiraled out of control in the first half, which ended up being a 10-5 scoreline. Interestingly enough, on the 10th round was where Zeus decided to showcase a slightly different style of play right after a tactical pause coming out from G2 Esports. Now, what Zeus did was, with this double AWP setup, they were actually using the power of wall banks to keep G2 in check. And I'm not saying that in the sense that they were able to get ridiculous shots every single time, the way the Buddy was able to back in Cash, where he would just straight up get 1 or 2 kills pretty much every single round guaranteed, every single game guaranteed. It's nothing like that, not at all. What's interesting to see was that Zeus, using his wall bangs, using his constant pressure, using the fact that they play a very slow-paced game, to be able to manipulate it so that G2 isn't really feeling comfortable taking those wide peaks. They're not really feeling comfortable pushing aggressively on CT side like they're used to doing. So they're not particularly comfortable in having their own timings. And this was made incredibly evident when you look at the amount of times a player on G2 either didn't take a peek in a situation where it would have been incredibly favorable, where I take us back to, again, the 10th round where Shox was actually just sitting down in mid and he could have taken a wide peek onto Mo, who was looking the other way, did reveal his position, did throw a few flashbangs. So Shox knew that the player probably didn't have too much of a great idea of where exactly he was, so taking a peek would be something that would normally be expected if you saw a fully confident G2 roster playing, but the confidence simply wasn't there. You saw that later on with Kenny S losing out op battles up against Mo over towards the A side as well, where fine, Kenny was actually holding the angle and Mo was able to peek into him and still get the kill, and that's just something you almost never see happening. In particular, beyond that, you have to look towards how exactly they were playing it. Gambit, it's been said that teams underneath the leadership of Zeus have taken over the old flip side style, where they're just winding the clock down to a particular amount of time. Not at all. That is not true in the slightest. What's very interesting about Gambit is that every single round they seem to be varying the amount of the particular time at which they go onto the site by about 5, 8 or 10 seconds. And this is incredibly impactful against teams like G2, which are so reliant on perpetually having their timing right, on perpetually having their star players knowing by instinct, knowing by game sense, and by just the virtue of experience that they have amassed over the years that, okay, we're getting into a flow in the game. We're kind of understanding how the opponent moves, how the opponent is going to be taking peaks against us. And this is something that was somewhat pointed out by Semler in the casting as well, that Kenny S in the back of B's side a couple of times was overwhelmed, and despite Kenny being incredibly good in close range scenarios, generally speaking, it just simply wasn't happening. He wasn't getting the timing right. He wasn't really able to get a proper read on when Gambit would be taking the peak, on when he should be taking a particular angle, which is incredibly unorthodox for a team like G2 to be falling at a stage as large as this. Now, I'm not saying that G2 shouldn't be the overdogs. Not at all. G2 were definitely the favorites to actually come out and win that one, considering how they have been showing themselves guns blazing. However, the fact that people think that Gambit being able to beat them in such a dominating fashion is surprising is completely ridiculous to me. We haven't seen much of Gambit in the past few months, and there is a reason why that is, which is primarily that they haven't been invited, but also because they have themselves chosen not to play these open qualifiers. They have chosen not to try and go through the qualifiers. Instead, they're focusing on their research, and that research was so incredibly obvious in their match against G2. In fact, it wouldn't even be a stretch to say that Gambit is a serious contender for a top 4 finish at this major right now. If they're not matched up against Astralis or SK, I do believe that they should be able to take pretty much anyone who comes against him in the quarterfinals. Even teams like FaZe needs to look out for them, because Gambit, the way that they use their wall bangs to be able to control the timing, the way that they're actually using their utility, their smokes, the way that Zeus is particularly manipulating and reading these rounds to make those mid-round calls, it's ridiculous. It's not something that these teams are used to dealing with anymore. It's a flashback, it's a blast of the past, it's something that we have seen a lot in past years, but recently, now that tournaments are becoming so much more frequent, teams just don't seem to have the time to be able to put in that research anymore. Teams just don't seem to be able to have the time to put in the anti-strats anymore. And while I don't think that they will be able to beat a team like SK or even Astralis for that matter, using their style, although I have to say, Astralis has been looking slightly shaky, so they might be able to take a game or two off of them in an upset victory. They're definitely serious contenders, and if by any stroke of luck SK is somehow eliminated, which I don't think will happen, by another team, then Gambit might even have a shot at taking this title, or if nothing else, making it to the finals. Now, of course, it could be said that, oh, alright, G2 is having a bad game. Yes, they were having a bad game. There's no doubt about that. They were not hitting their shots. They were just not making an impact the way that their players normally do. Body is one of the most stable players in the entire CSGO scene. He almost always shows up, he almost always puts up his numbers, he almost always fulfills his role. NBK did have a decent game this time around, but even he was in the negative scoreline. At the end of the day, you need to keep in mind, if all 5 players of a team, or 4 if you don't count NBK, players of a team, are visibly underconfident in how they're playing, they're visibly having problems, and they did not lose the previous day. They actually beat Navi in not a convincing fashion, but their CT side was incredibly convincing, incredibly dominant on overpass. So if nothing else, G2 should have been full of confidence on their CT side. However, you look at how they're playing, where they're not taking these peaks, where they're not actually taking advantage of their incredible raw skill, their incredible raw talent, and when they are trying to go for those peaks, such as with Kenny S, they're just not getting the timing right every single time. They're getting caught out with smokes in their hand. The fact of the matter is, G2 was not in form, but that's not because of their own fault. It's because Gambit, with their manipulation of timing, with their manipulation of wall banks, which I have discussed in more detail in an article that I will link in the description, but Gambit, with their usage of wall banks, smokes, utility in general, and on top of everything, the way they were shifting around their positions after every tactical pause that G2 took, that just meant that G2 was not able to get a rhythm going, G2 was not able to get their timing going, and G2, as a team that is so incredibly reliant on star power, their stars were just rendered completely and utterly useless. This was Gambit's victory. This was not G2's loss.